the Associated Press story chronicles how outraged these jurors were by the government's own testimony about what happened at Waco to the Branch Davidians. Now understand, this is after the trial is over. The newspaper establishment, in this particular story, it's the Associated Press, is asking the jurors, what did they think? What comments do they have? They were just fit to be tied. It turns out that those tanks that we watched on the day of the assault, the final assault when there was the big fire and everything, those tanks that we watched on television were not just poking holes in the wall to insert gas into the structure. This is a residence that's occupied by men, women, and children, yet those tanks that we saw, according to this trial testimony, the government's testimony, those tanks were ordered to penetrate this residence occupied by men, women, and children. The strategy, the government's strategy as described at the trial by the government itself, was to bring this structure down. This is a residence occupied by men, women, and children. Our government, that is supposed to be based on the ideals of freedom and liberty, justice for all, our government instructed its government agents to climb into tanks and roll those tanks right into a structure that's occupied with men, women, and children. And as a result, some of the children that we were told the government was saving died as the structure came down and crushed skulls. They died from blunt force trauma to their skulls. It's like this. For people who are wondering, how come there's a militia movement that's growing in this country? Well, it used to be, I'm over 50. I was 52, just had a birthday just here recently. And we used to use the phrase up in arms as sort of a metaphor. It was kind of a joking metaphor. People are up in arms about this or that. But when you have a government that orders its agents to get into tanks and run those tanks through a residence occupied by men, women, and children, and then there are no indictments. There's no indictment of the tank drivers. There's no indictment of the people who ordered the tank drivers. There's no indictment of any of the high officials. At that point, the truce has broken down, and the phrase "up in arms," the people are up in arms, is the only thing that's left for them as a reality, instead of it being a metaphor. So yeah, you have a growing militia movement because we now have a government that isn't technically violating the Constitution or technically creating injustices. We've got a government now that does it in a big way, does it on television, doesn't even get to sweep it under the rug, testifies at trial that what it did was order its agents to get into tanks and run the tanks through a residence occupied by men, women, and children, and there are no indictments of any of these people. At the very least, they should be indicted for manslaughter, if not murder. We haven't had that happen, and that's why you have a militia movement that's growing in this country. They see a government that may, depending on which aspect of the militia you ask, there's going to be different things that bother them, and maybe you won't agree with them on this issue or that issue. But the one point that we can all agree on is you cannot have a government that just arbitrarily kills people, runs tanks through houses, and not even have the agents who drove the tanks be indicted. You cannot have that. At that point, there is no more choice. You have to be up in arms. You have to be ready to deal with that government in the same way that it's dealing with their citizens. Now, I'm not advocating that we raise an army and go storm Washington, D.C. No, this is not a question of going in and invading. This is a question of people feeling the need to be ready to protect themselves with deadly force if they have to, against a government that has gone outlaw. To the Branch Davidians, I would say you've been treated in a way that no human being should be treated, let alone people on American soil. This is an outrage. This cannot be allowed to stand. I am very pleased that Jeff Davis has been pursuing this issue in public access TV. This isn't an issue that's going to be pushed by the establishment media. This is Terry Liberty Parker, hardcore libertarian in Austin, Texas.
A Branch Davidian to join us. Clive, we're honored here to have your mother.
That's my mother.
Yeah, this is Clive Doyle's mother. And us that know these people, we call her Grandma Edna. Grandma Edna, do you have any opening statements or comments you'd like to make to the viewers of the program tonight?
Well, I'm just hoping that the people of America will wake up to know that they've got a government that's running this country that's out to destroy those that don't go along with them. And what happened at Waco is not the last you've seen of it. It's going to continue on till God comes down and finishes the work himself.
So well, I want to just ask you all to comment on that. I would agree with everything she said there, that there is a government in place now that is out to destroy anybody that's righteous.
Haven't they proved it?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the scriptures teach, that
That's right.
there are powers that want to do away with God's people. They want to persecute, make war on them, and unfortunately the scripture predicts that they will overcome and kill them for a period of time until the judgment sits and God intervenes.
And then in the end we win, or the righteous people win.
It says that the kingdom will be given to the saints.
In fact, I heard you, my first introduction to you, Edna, was on a Day 51 video, and I think you were sitting there with probably Woody Kendrick or one of these people. Maybe I've got it confused now, but somebody asked one of the Davidians about, do you think Jesus is coming soon? And you said...
I was at the front of the courthouse after the trial was over and Clive got out. And somebody was saying, do you think David will come back? And I said, yeah, the sooner the better.
Well, actually,
and I'm still saying that. I'm still asking God, please hurry up and send David back and put an end to all this terrible violence and evil that's ruling this world. And nobody seems inclined to want to stop it. That's the pity of it all. People are just sitting back taking it. Who started the militia in this country? Bill Clinton, because he sits in a position where he brought about a position where people are afraid, so they take up arms for self-defense. Why shouldn't they? Who wants somebody bashing in their home and kicking things around and just stand up to it? No way. Not in my home anyway.
Grandma, do you have any thoughts about this? We hear rumors about this new world order that Bush...
Sure, there's a new world order. The devil's going to bring one in, which is is almost in existence now, and God's got one which is far better, and that's the one I'm waiting for. I don't want anything to do with Satan and the people that let him use them.
I agree. I think she did a fantastic job, Clive.